Hello and welcome to the Fantasy Sanctuary. We are live. It is mailbag time. It is the off season. What better time to do a mailbag? And of course, I am joined by the fantastic Lewis Wood, who is going to dive into some questions with me. Lewis, before we get going, remind everybody who doesn't know where they can find your fantastic work and your fantastic new YouTube channel, which I'm thoroughly enjoying at the minute.
Thank you, mate. You can find me over on YouTube at Fancy Pancake or on Twitter at FF_pancake. I'm currently, I think, 14 episodes into 50 rookie profiles in 50 days. So if you want a little sort of 5-6 minute preview of all of the fancy relevant rookies, I am, about a third of the way through that.
Absolutely beautiful. Beautiful. Right, we're doing a mailbag show, so let's get to some questions. Andrew, thank you for joining us. Welcome in. We've got some pre-submitted questions from a few people. These were some in our Discord. If you haven't joined our Discord, you can hit the little join button down below. Come become a member. You will not regret it. So I believe this was from Gary. He was saying, outside of the obvious aging assets that very few people want, do you have a player you are more out on than consensus, and why? Who you got, Lewis?
So I readjusted my Dynasty rankings relatively recently and went through and mapped everything against Keep Trade Cut, which I know is something similar that you'll do with your survival kit. And someone, actually not the highest difference between them, but obviously you need to grade it kind of on a curve for when they're higher up, because if you have someone at wide receiver 5 compared to wide receiver 2, that's quite a big difference. The player that I wanted to talk about for this, and it will surprise a few people given those that know me and even those that don't, that can see my background, Kyron Williams is a relatively big one for me. I am not 100% convinced of Kyron's future with the team, and not in terms of this year. He's obviously still on a rookie deal and being paid absolutely nothing because of where he was drafted on day 3. The fact they drafted Blake Corum, I don't know if the Rams are happy at this point with that draft pick. And I think they've kind of shown in the postseason press conferences, they talked a lot about explosivity. And there's been a lot of reporting, particularly Jordan Madrid from The Athletic, talking about the Rams wanting more explosivity on offense. We were really dink and dunk this year, and especially on the ground. Kyron Williams, I don't think, is a particularly special player at anything. I think he's got a great nose for the end zone and good vision, but he's not going to get you big chunks. And I wouldn't be surprised if the Rams then choose to move on. It's not immediately, but if he doesn't have the same longevity as some other running backs in the same position, and given that I think he's currently consensus Dynasty running back, 5 or 6, somewhere around that range.
Yeah, I've got 8 in January DLF ADP. But that's a bit lower than most other places.
Yeah, so I wouldn't be surprised. Basically, compared to the value that he's currently seeing, and obviously right now is a difficult time to buy and sell running backs, or to sell running backs, I think Kyron Williams probably doesn't have the same longevity, and I wouldn't be surprised in a running back class like this one if the Rams then target a more explosive back to be able to spell Kyron and to eventually be able to move on, because given that they have the ready-made replacement in Blake Corum that's a very similar player sat there in reserve.
Yeah, I think there's nervousness anytime it's a back that nobody's got anything invested in, isn't it? The Rams didn't pay any big draft capital. I think this offseason is going to be telling. If they extend him this offseason, I think you can be very confident that he's a reliable fantasy running back for the next 2, maybe 3 seasons, depending on how much guaranteed money he gets. If they don't, I'd be absolutely terrified. So, yeah, I'm not panicking on Kyron yet. But if he's not signed an extension by, let's say, mid-August, and there's not rumors that they're in talks, I'd definitely be very panicked. I'm just looking up. Yeah, I'm a bit lower than consensus. He's my running back 11. So yeah, I'm kind of in lockstep with you. For me, there's the obvious one, Dalton Kincaid. Like, I feel like I get to bash on him as much as possible. I don't understand how on earth he can be valued as a top 6 dynasty tight end still, despite the fact he's done nothing, and he's really old. Other players that are obvious sells for me, Devonta Smith is perhaps, I
Okay.
guess, a slightly interesting one in that he's being held up very highly still. I've got here he's wide receiver 16 ADP. I love the player, I love the talent, but AJ Brown's not that old. He's not going anywhere. This offense is always going to be run first. And yeah, look, mate, it's becoming a joke at this point. I still don't believe Jalen Hurts is an above average NFL quarterback operating from the pocket. I think he can't
Yeah.
complete balls in the middle. Yeah, if it's best ball, I quite like the boom bust nature of Devonta Smith. But I'm not in love with the Devonta Smith being a top 15 dynasty wide receiver. That feels a little bit rich for me because I think he doesn't have that top 5 ceiling. And I'd rather chase guys in that value range that I think could potentially, if all goes well, hit that top 5 point.
Yeah, and I think Devonta Smith's a really interesting one, and for a while, I think the range is still there, but slightly murky now with the rookies heading in, or with the now sophomore receivers. But when you had kind of T Higgins, Jalen Waddle, Brandon Ayuk, and Devonta Smith around the same range, which is all kind of the wide receiver 2 on their team, and for me, I have Ayuk a little bit lower, but I have Devonta Smith the lowest out of the 3 between T and Jalen Waddle, and part of that is just the upside of target volume that I think they can get, and obviously also the upside of good target volume, which does make quite a significant difference. So yeah, I'm slightly below consensus on Devonta Smith. I find him a really difficult player to actually start, and he's kind of that high-end wide receiver 2 range, but I find him, because he's going to be valued towards the back end of a wide receiver 1, a really difficult player to then buy and consistently start. And I found in one of my deeper teams where I was quite set at wide receiver, Devonta Smith was quite often ending up on my bench because I just didn't feel that I trusted him to have the upside, even though, as you say, like a best ball asset, someone that's occasionally going to go off for 30 points, fine, but as we always say, you don't want to be sort of sat there trying to predict when those 30-point weeks actually are.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm also very intrigued as to what the Eagles are going to do from a salary cap perspective, because it's amazing. They've got an incredible roster. They've won the Super Bowl. Hats off to them. But the way they are mortgaging the future, if you go and pull up the Eagles Spotrac page, I think it's the top 15 players have all got a base salary of under $1.5 million.
Yeah.
I mean, Jalen Hurts, his cap hits are 21, 31, 42, but then it gets very, very, very tasty after that. There's a point at which you can't just keep pushing money into the future. So I'm intrigued to see what they're going to do there. But let's dive across some new questions. Tyler's in the chat. Evening, Tyler. He's asking, what are we doing with a very young yet seemingly phased out tweener, Kyle Pitts? Are you buying, selling? What are we doing with Kyle Pitts for you right now, Lewis?
He's a very difficult player to rank, and so my ranking currently, I have him at tight end 15, which is quite significantly below consensus. Keep trade cut, he's tight end 9, and I know keep trade cut is not the most reliable of resources, but it's definitely an interesting one when you're looking at like recency bias. I actually, even though I have him that low, I actually see him as a buy candidate. I think there's a decent chance, given that they don't seemingly want to use him, that he can end up getting traded this offseason. I don't think you have to pay any more than kind of a mid-second for him, and we know that the athleticism is still there. So I think definitely that there could be something interesting with him. The main thing with Pitts is that he's not a difference maker at tight end. You're buying him if you're trying to invest on him potentially being a difference maker, but with the tight end situation the way it is currently, and with this rookie class about to come in, you shouldn't really make a point of paying for someone that isn't going to get you a significant points per game advantage, which he isn't right now. Now, if he was to be traded to the 2 situations, and sorry that I've answered both questions with Rams so far, but if he were to be traded for, say, a 4th, maybe, you could see maybe even later.
I don't think you need to pay that much for him. I think you could get him for a 5th or a 6th right now, to be honest.
Yeah. If he were to be traded for a day 3 pick of some kind to either the Broncos or the Rams, which are both very tight end needy teams and want that move tight end as well, but also very intelligent and creative play callers that have shown a propensity, well, Sean Payton's shown a propensity to use a tight end in creative ways. Sean McVay has constantly been trying to get a tight end that he can use in creative ways, has tried it with Gerald Everett, and that didn't work out. And obviously, Colby Parkinson doesn't have hands. So I think if he were to be traded to a situation where he can be used more creatively, that potentially could be of interest. But I think if you're buying him right now, you're trying to buy the dip and hope that he gets moved, because if he stays in Atlanta, that is not going to produce any fancy value going forwards.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the thing is that based on price, he's almost always going to be a buy, because I think that there's no risk really. I don't think you, as you said, you have to pay more than the late second, quite frankly. So any player at that point is a buy, because there's always upside. I just don't see the range of outcomes that are realistic for him to be a reliable fantasy option. I don't think he's the same athlete. I don't think he can separate at the same level as he did in college. And yeah, it just makes me nervous. I would rather go and take a flyer on Chiga Okonkwo or Theo Johnson or guys like that, rather than having to pay up and go and get Kyle Pitts. I think there's a hell of a lot of name brands still attached to Kyle Pitts. I'd rather just let somebody else take the risk, take the flyer, and I'd rather probably not buy. If you're absolutely desperate and you can get him for free, why not take a dart throw? But yeah, realistically, the person who's got Kyle Pitts on their roster is probably a Kyle Pitts believer. And as much as we're sitting here saying, yeah, you can get him for a late second, I'm not sure you actually can in most leagues, because I think people who are rostering Kyle Pitts are probably valuing him as that top 4 NFL pick and still expecting him to potentially break out. So not sure about that.
And I was, as you were talking, I was trying to predict the names that you were going to say, and I predicted both Chig and Theo Johnson, because I know that we feel quite similarly about them. And I think you can probably get them cheaper than Pitts, and I have both of them rated higher in my Dynasty rankings. The interesting thing about the draft capital stuff is we obviously talk about kind of the Dynasty managers clinging on to the fact that he was, drafted in the top 4 of rookie drafts, and also, the top 5 of the actual draft. The thing that we do have to maintain is that draft capital stays important in the NFL for a very long time. So even if it's not right now, there's going to be, when he eventually hits free agency, there's going to be teams that still want to take a chance on him. So if you do believe in the athleticism, the separation is definitely has been an issue since the moment he hit the league. If you do still believe in the talent, I wouldn't be surprised if there are still NFL teams as well that will cling to that sort of top 5 pick status. And I think as long as he's in the league, he's still going to find somewhere to play and someone that wants to take a shot on him, because they had a really good pre-draft evaluation on him.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it'll be interesting to see where we go. The next question in the chat, remember, if you want your questions answered, we're answering 100% of questions we get whilst we're live. So get them in the comments down below. Tyler's saying, Mixon seems like an upside sell given new OC hype, but Asian contract looming. May age less gracefully than Aaron Jones given injuries and efficient profile. So I guess it's a simple case. Joe Mixon, you buying, you selling? What are you doing with him right now?
I think he was an upside sell 2 months ago or 2.5 months ago in the season. The attitude of the Dynasty community towards older running backs basically means that you can get them for free in the offseason. And so, and this is the point that we'll always make, and we've referenced already, anyone can be a buy or a sell depending on the price. If you can go and buy Joe Mixon for very cheap, and if you can sell him for very high, perfect. If he's an upside sell, I'm not sure what people are actually paying for him right now. And I think if someone's offering you a late first, amazing. If they're offering you maybe, around towards the 203, 204, perfect. But I don't think the upside is there right now. And I actually wrote a piece recently for DLF about buying older running backs in the off season when the value is deflated. And when you look at some of the prices that the older running backs on competitive rosters are going to be able, that you're going to be able to buy them for, it's a no-brainer to go and get them relatively soon. Even though obviously you could just burn the pick when you're buying a player pre-draft. I think particularly the term upside sell, we sell older running backs. That's the way that the dynasty community has worked for a while. And it's something that we all understand. I think it's particularly the word upside that I don't think I agree with, because I don't think you're going to find someone in the offseason where points aren't being scored that's going to want to pay that much for him. Like, I don't think you're going to get a first of any kind for Mixon at this point in the year.
Yeah, I think for me, I think he's a must sell. I think I'm always team always be selling running backs. I think he's at a point where his contract is cut off this year. He's going into his age 29 season. We know that whilst the Texans' run game was pretty abhorrent, it was Bobby Slowick was running first down, running second down, and if I have to pass, finally I have to pass on third down. I don't think he's going to see the same volume. I think the Texans are the exact type of team that's probably going to spend an early day 3 pick on a running back to complement Joe Mixon. The price, I still think, is really good. Like DLF, he's a top 12 running back in ADP.
Wow.
Keep trade cut. I've just had a look. They've got him at running back 22, which is worth between an early 25 first and a late 27 first. Between an early 25 second and a late 27 first. So yeah, if you can get 201, 202 for Joe Mixon, that's an absolute smash for me right now. I think that this is potentially the final year of relevance for Joe Mixon. So yeah, give me an early second for him right now. And I think anytime there's any sort of hype or anything about a veteran running back, it's a good opportunity to be looking to move on as such. Right, well, let's get to Roy's question. I know he's been itching to ask it for a couple of days. So Lewis, talk to me. He calls him Finnin. We'll call him Fannin. Fannin Jr., I know you're not a fan. I'm a big fan. What is it that you do not like right now?
Yeah, I think there's a few different things about Harry Fannin Jr. that I don't hugely like. And like, you cannot dispute the production. He was the most productive tight end in college football this year. I'm a little bit worried about the size and also the play strength. So I don't think, and there were actually some interesting stats about this put out by Hayden Winks of Underdog recently that showed that he is a relatively good run blocker. But when we have a very different process. I just tend to work off film grades because I'm not very analytically minded. And when I watch his film, I seem to see him getting put on his ass relatively often and basically struggling in the run game. And I think that lack of play strength from the film that I watched translated through to his game as well. So I think the ability to play through contact I didn't think was amazing. The route tree was really heavily manufactured. And then I think, like, in press coverage, that play strength at the line of scrimmage meant that he really struggled to work against more physical corners. And I think when you have a player like this who is, intended to be, I don't really see him as a lining up in line. So I think you're going to have to use him slightly differently. And then I don't think he's actually got the physicality to be a mismatch. It leads me to a situation where I'm not entirely sure what the player is. And it's interesting that we've obviously just come off the conversation about Kyle Pitts, of this kind of, a lot of the time when these unicorns come into the league that you're like, they're too good at this to be this, but they're not quite good enough at this to be this. So they're kind of a bit of everything. And like, even like Kyle Pitts or Isaiah Simmons, that sort of player that you're like, oh, they're a tweener. They can do lots of sort of different things. Yeah, I do think like the physicality is good. He's got really strong hands. He's either going to fall at tight end 3 or 4 to me. So it's not to say, when I talk about being down on a player, it's not that I hate them and that I wouldn't draft them. It's that I really see some concerns in the size and in the frame that then make me think that that play strength is going to be a huge issue. And if he's going to be a move piece and he's going to be used creatively, that worries me for someone coming into the league already saying you're going to have to use this player creatively in order to make them function.
I think that for me, the size concerns I think are overblown. If I told you he weighed in at the Senior Bowl 6'3" 1/8", weighing 238 pounds, if I told you that Brock Bowers weighed in at 6'3", 243 pounds, there was certainly no concerns about Brock Bowers' size once he got in the NFL. I think that Fannin is a rare mover for me. I think his ability to separate is phenomenal. I don't get the play concerns. It's like, yeah, if you want him to be a Y, if you're expecting him to line up in line, go one-on-one with defensive ends in the NFL, he's not going to do that. But how many tight ends are asked to do that more than once or twice a game? Like, to me, he's a guy. I don't think he's going to be used in line a huge amount, but do I think he can be used on trap blocks? Do I think he can be used chipping, releasing, double teams, all that kind of thing? Yeah, absolutely. Like, I've got no concerns about his blocking. I think it's a willingness. You know, if he's a guy that is shying away from that part of the game, isn't really willing to go in and get his hands dirty, I'd be concerned. I don't see that at all. I think, you know, the way he was used this last year, for example, so he had 311 snaps as an inline tight end. He had 204 as a slot, 160 out wide. That's more inline snaps than we see from a guy like Mark Andrews. Nobody talks about Mark Andrews as a slot only kind of movable piece and stuff like that. Like, I think that in the modern NFL, he can be a inline tight end who runs 50% of his routes from the slot and out wide. And I think that his movement ability is rare. I think his ability to create separation is rare. And I think at the catch point, he's fantastic. So, yeah, I really like what I've seen. I've only done 2 games so far. I've still got 2 more to watch. So maybe I've just picked out some good ones. But I mean, analytically, he absolutely pops massively in my model. So yeah, I'm really excited. At the moment, I've yet to finalize my Titan rankings, pencil him in at sort of Titan 1. But we will see over the next couple of weeks how that shakes out a little bit more.
Can I ask a question for you before we move on?
Yeah.
And this isn't like, genuinely isn't. I love this time of year hearing lots of people's different opinions. When you watch film, when you're scouting prospects, how much does quality of opposition mean anything to you? Or is it just a case of, in college, quality of opposition isn't consistent? You can be watching, 2 fantastic teams and there'll still be some quite average players on them.
I think it's you need to take it into account. I think it's like all these things. It's grades, it's shades of grey, isn't it? Because if you're sitting there watching, North Dakota and stuff like that, it's like, yeah, okay, they have one tough game a year when they play South Dakota, and the rest of it, it's a bunch of guys that are probably going to be insurance salesmen. I watched the Texas A&M game for Fannin, which is, I don't know who else they played, but probably I'd imagine one of the tougher games on the schedule last year. And I thought he held his own. I thought he was fantastic. I didn't think he looked like he was playing a different level of competition. It's like, yeah, of course, I'd love to see him playing in the SEC every week. I'd love to see him going up against, those powerhouses. But I don't see huge concerns. It's like, that's why I try and watch at least 3, if not 4 games of every prospect. And I will normally try and pick at least one against a powerhouse team and one against normal competition and see if there's a difference. And to me, one of his better games was against Texas A&M. So that says to me that this is a guy that can translate. And yeah, I'm very excited. And I think I wouldn't be shocked if he creeped into round 1. I know there seems to be this talk that there's 2 elite tight ends that are going to go top 15. I'll be honest, one of it, I don't see it at all. And I think it's bonkers that he's going that way in NFL mocks. I think, to me, Fannin deserves to be in the consideration with the other 2, if not ahead of them. So, yeah, the way the NFL have got it and consensus mocks at the moment, I can't get my head around. But yeah, it's as I said, it's still early. We still got a little bit of time to round out and finish off the process. Cool. We've got some questions from Tom in the chat. Remember, if you want your questions answered, get them in the comments below. Tom said, what's the point in rookie drafts where it's better to trade out for a random 2026 first? And what's the strength of that class look like? Have you got thoughts on this, Lewis?
Yeah, I think there's a quite specific answer, which is it's when you're on the clock and it's when you don't like the value of what you're seeing in front of you. In terms of, like, in this class where it's better to trade out for a random 2026 first, towards the back of the first round is always going to be the answer, but that's not really going to change dependent on different classes. I think it's a really interesting idea because you are obviously pushing value back by a year. I think it's you can nearly always get a little bit more, even if you're just straight up trading the 112, just because obviously the 112 gives you a player now and the 2026 first gives you a player in a year's time. I definitely think like there is a huge advantage to buying firsts more than a year out. Because and some of the best Dynasty trades that I've ever pulled off have been when I've bought future years firsts, because you just never know what's going to happen to a team and we just can't predict where that first is going to be. So, you know, if you are on the clock at the 110 and you don't like what's around you, then absolutely. If you find yourself at the, you know, at the 201 and a player that you absolutely love has slipped, that you would rather, you know, it's about judging the players and would you pay a 2026 first for them? And then that's the easy way of judging whether or not you're comfortable to just trade straight out.
Yeah, I think normally, I think I was asked this question last year, and I think I said I'd rather the 108 last year than a 25 first, but I'd take a 25 first over the 109. For me, it's probably about the 107. I'd take the 107 in this year's class. I don't think I'd take the 108. For me, there's a bit of a teardrop after those top 7. I quite like the 26 draft class. A lot depends on the quarterbacks. You know, I always say quarterbacks dictate the depth of the draft class. You know, if Arch Manning comes out, it looks good. We're expecting, you know, Drew Aller, Carson Beck, Garrett. I get his name wrong every time. Nussmeier. This is a guy that doesn't watch much college, so he can't pronounce names. The only college I watch is tape, and I turn the sound off. So like, there's decent depth at the quarterback position, which always makes me intrigued by a draft class. I think it's probably a bit too early to talk about the running backs, although Nicholas Singleton does look great. I think Evan Stewart, you know, I was hoping he came out this year. The fact he's gone back, I think he should be another, you know, reasonably high pick. So yeah, it's a decent draft class. I think it's probably a little bit better than this year's without maybe the elite talent. You know, there's no Ashton Genty, it's looking like next year. So I would say I'd keep the 107. But yeah, if I could trade the 108 or later for a future first, I'd absolutely do that. If I could do it for a 27 first, I'd probably do that. I think for me, I love acquiring future first. I think it's still an undervalued asset if you can get future firsts, because people always overvalue. People are arrogant, let's be honest. People always think they're better at Dynasty than they are. And if you can get those firsts, I've been on a bit of a tear in the last few weeks acquiring 27 firsts. I think I've got 4 or 5 in the last few days. Because that's looking like a pretty special draft class. So go and get this 27 first, Tom. Wesley is in the chat though. He's saying, would you send Laporta and a late 26 first for McBride in non-time premium?
First thing, as we basically have just been talking about, don't call your first a late 26 first at this point. It doesn't matter how good and how special and how deep your team is. Things can always fall apart. So if it's Laporta and a 26 first for Trey McBride in non-tight end premium, no, not for me. I love Trey McBride. I am still reasonably high on Sam Laporta. And we obviously have basically seen, like, for the majority of the season this year as well, up until the end, kind of the two ends of the scale for touchdown variance for Sam Laporta. And that's really like undermined the performance this year and made him overvalued the season before. But that in non-tight end premium, the difference between them is not a 26 first for me. And I think, definitely the thing here is referring to it as a late first, even if you won the title this season, you don't know how things are going to go. And I don't think in non-tight end premium, that is not the difference between those two players to me.
Yeah, I mean, I'm notoriously low on Sam Laporta. I've just pulled up my trade values. So I don't deal, as Lou said, I don't deal in early, mid, late picks until week 4 of the season. So my 2026 pick is worth 23 points. I've got Sam Laporta worth 11. And I've got Trey McBride worth 30. So it's not miles away. But I would be trying to get, can I get, a late 25 second back? Can I get maybe a third? Can I get a player that I quite like as a dart throw added in to make that? I think you're probably selling low on Laporta and buying high on McBride, which I don't particularly love. So yeah, I wouldn't do that deal straight up, and I think based on consensus values, you definitely don't have to do that deal straight up, Wesley. So I'd be going back trying to get something extra on top, or trying to tweak it slightly to see if you can make it a bit more palatable. Right, let's fire through some questions here. Tyler's in the chat again. Is there a clear buy in Jarl's, see my accent there, eyes that the market may be too down on because of unknowns, or too high in given current unknowns? So do you think there's a player that the market's got wrong? I'm going to go first here because I've been banging the drum. There's a guy that I think the market's completely wrong, and that's Rashie Rice. Like, this is a guy that was a top 5 dynasty tight end before he got injured. Okay, he might be eased back in at the beginning of the next season. There might be a looming suspension. Week 10 next year, I think he's a top 10 dynasty tight end. And at the moment, he's being valued as wide receiver 20 something. Where are we? Yeah, wide receiver 22 currently. Like, that's wild. Like, Rashie Rice is completely wrongly valued, and I think that if you can go out and buy the dip on him, I would absolutely do that.
Yeah, I think the other one to me, and I am completely agreed on Rashie Rice. I have him way overvalued compared to the market, and I think people weren't paying attention to the fact that I know he didn't play much of this season, but his points per game was something like the 2023 wide receiver 4. It was unbelievable the tear that he was on, and that was his sophomore season. Like, he is coming on so incredibly. And yeah, there's going to be a suspension, but sometimes the prospect of a looming suspension provides a buy window for a player because people forget that we are dealing with a much longer window. One of the ones that I'm really interested in, and looking at sort of unknowns, someone that I'm higher on than average is Dak Prescott. Dak has been an elite fancy tight end way more often than people seem to think that he has been. And currently, and again, I'm just going off keep trade cut consensus, he's currently the quarterback 22, which I think is genuinely insane. I can't see, like, if he is healthy, and I only have him at quarterback 15, if he is healthy, and presuming they go and get something else on offense this season. Now, yeah, you would have liked a different OC and not sticking with Brian Schottenheimer. But if he's fully healthy, his floor is like QB 14 on the season, just because of that passing volume that we've seen from him for the past few years. People forget, like, last season, Dak was being spoken about as an MVP candidate until like the last 2 games of the season. For the majority of the season, it was between him and Brock Purdy. And I think he's one of those assets that people are just so in on and then so out on immediately. And so I find myself quite high on him, even if, like, we would have liked them to have gone and gotten, even if it had been Kellen Moore, even if it had been, it didn't have to be Ben Johnson, even if it had been someone new. Now, obviously, we've seen him with Kellen Moore, and that was when he performed at his best. He's not that old either. Like, obviously, he's over 30, but like, there's so much more from Dak Prescott, and I think people are forgetting, mostly because genuinely, I think people think it's funny to laugh at the Cowboys, which it is, and therefore are undervaluing Dak off the back of it.
Yeah, I think I agree with you. I mean, I've got him as my quarterback 13, so yeah, I'm much higher than consensus on him. I think this is where people get quarterback value wrong in Superflex leagues. In that, I think, yeah, if you're one quarterback league, I'm fine with Dak Prescott being at QB 20 because the upside's not great. Like, we see it time in, time out. He's a low end QB1, high end QB2, year in, year out when he's healthy. I don't think there's any chance he's going to be a top 5 quarterback. But in Superflex, that's incredibly valuable. And I don't think people value the security and the reliability at the position in Superflex. People would much rather chase the sexy young thing or the high upside player, but actually Dak Prescott's pretty solid, pretty reliable as long as he stays on the field. To answer Rory's question here, no, I'm not concerned at all about Worthy's late emergence affecting Rice. If anything, I think it benefits him. I think that just having another weapon to stretch the field to kind of keep that second safety back, I think would kind of keep me happy there. A few other guys that I'm much higher than consensus that I think we're valuing wrong. Chigakonkwo, I think he was breaking out before our eyes at the end of last season. I don't think people are valuing him correctly. Tank Bigsby, Travis Etienne. I think Tank Bigsby took over that backfield and people didn't realize it because the Jags were terrible. I think that's going to be, at least a 60% Tank Bigsby backfield. And then 2, I guess, deeper wide receivers. I don't tend to like wide receivers in this range, but Darnell Mooney, Rashid Shaheed, I think both are criminally undervalued. Darnell Mooney was like a top 24 wide receiver most of last year. Rashid Shaheed was a superstar when he was on the field. I think both of those guys are undervalued for a range of different reasons. So those are some guys that I'd be looking to go out and buy right now. Wesley's come back to follow up the Titan question. So this was trading Laporta and a 26 first for McBride. He's saying if he got Kamara back and the 301s, that would be Laporta 26 first, 301 for McBride and Kamara. I quite like that. I'll be honest. Kamara's got that contract. Okay, we don't think the Saints are going to be great on offense, but we know he's probably going to get decent target volume. I would probably pull the trigger on that, Wesley. Right. Benzo Breaks is asking, is Ashton Jency the 101 in Superflex leagues? It's funny enough, we just dropped a 1QB mock draft with Heath Cummings on the channel. Scroll down and click on that. In the next few days, we have got a Superflex mock draft coming. And spoiler alert, but yes, Ashton Jency is the 101 in that. I know I'd absolutely be taking Ashton Jency 101 in all leagues. Superflex, 1QB, or any other. Is he your 101 right now, Lewis?
As of the time of asking, and I'm very open to this changing, because I actually haven't done my a huge amount of scouting on Ashton Jency, because it's that generational sort of player that you're like, what am I going to add by watching him that other people aren't already saying? At the time of asking, no. I am very intrigued. I am really falling in love with Ted McMillan. And I think people are undervaluing him and that kind of rare movement skills at the size, the combination of all of the different things he can do on the field, because they're lower down on the wide receiver class as a whole, which I'm not actually, and I find very interesting. And I think there's an interesting thing about kind of windows and longevity. And obviously it's not to say I would always take a wide receiver over a running back. And I do think it's a really interesting conversation, and I'm going to continue to flip-flop on it throughout the rest of the off season. But obviously you compare a generational running back to, I have as a blue chip prospect, but not quite in the same tier as Ashton Jency. I currently have Ted McMillan over him. I know that's a very controversial opinion right now, but I think there's an interesting question about when you look at the last few running backs to go that high in Dynasty rookie drafts, how many of them would you still take at the 101 right now? And I think they can gain and lose value so easily. Whereas I think wide receivers in terms of, and I know people talk about kind of 3-year windows in Dynasty and not looking at sort of someone to hold down your roster for the foreseeable future and for the next 10 years. But to me, Ted McMillan is genuinely that level of prospect that I'd be willing to take him at the 101.
That's very interesting. Very interesting. Yeah, not that high, not as high on Ted myself. Rory saying, how much for Gut Punch is the Hunter news? Yeah, look, I took a stand. I said that I'd take Hunter at 101 right now. Before the news, that's obviously changed after it. Yeah, not very happy. I felt like he was going to push towards wide receiver, and yeah, it could still happen. But I think the fact that he's going to the combine as a corner probably shows what the NFL thinks of him. So yeah, for me now, I said it in our Discord earlier, he's undraftable in normal fantasy leagues, just because I think he's going to be a complete headache, and you're never going to be able to know when to start him. So yeah, I'm devastated.
Yeah, I've put him outside of my... I mean, I always really struggled ranking Travis Hunter. Every time I put out rankings, I just put Travis Hunter at wide receiver 5 and add an asterisk and be like, I don't know. I've no idea yet. So with this, I've got him outside of my first two rounds. I still think it's potentially worth a flyer, because obviously there's a world in which a team can then decide to use him differently, or he goes to a different team and they decide to use him differently. But yeah, I think I'm surprised if this is if this is a decision that he's made, rather than a decision that he's been told by his agent and by the NFL that this is the way he is going to be used when he hits the league. Because, from a financial perspective, obviously he should want to be a wide receiver, and he also should be aware of the fact that he's not going to be a full-time player both ways. But yeah, it's a massive shame, because he is as fantastic as a corner he is also a fantastic wide receiver. So it's a shame to be losing that from the class.
Yeah, absolutely. Tom's asking, which dynasty assets are you expecting a bump in value for in free agency? Have you got anyone that you're eyeing up?
Well, the free agent class this year isn't fantastic at sort of running back and wide receiver, especially actually at tight end as well. So in terms of like who is going to have a bump, I don't honestly know that there's a huge amount. The one that comes to mind is Jalen McMillan, although I think he's probably currently being valued as if Chris Godwin is out of town. So I think it'll be interesting whether or not he does then end up going back. There's definitely a few, like, I think the NFL is going to value Najee Harris more than the fantasy community does currently. And I think he is going to end up being a 1A on a team. Like, obviously, he's not going to be a bell cow, but I think he's going to be fantasy relevant on this next contract and on the next team that finds him. Because I think again, that draft capital thing. I also think Najee Harris is a reasonably, league average running back, and I think will find a job because there's always going to be jobs out there. So Najee Harris will be an interesting one for me that I think a lot of the league are then out on. Those to me will be the two big ones. Like the free agency class is more going to be, a lot of the bumps are going to be about who doesn't end up going back rather than a player who finds an exciting new situation. Like you can say, Rome Odunze because Keenan Allen isn't going to resign. It's more about that than it is the players that are leaving.
Yeah, I'll give you one at each position, Tom. That I think is going to see a big bump in value. So Sam Darnold, I think we talked about this on the video. I think last week with Dave. Sam Darnold's criminally undervalued. I think as soon as he signs a $40 million a year contract, I think his value is going to absolutely skyrocket, and I think people will then start valuing him correctly. Jaylen Warren, shock. I'm sure this is music to Tom's ears. We're back here, back on the Jaylen Warren bandwagon. I think that Najee Harris is gone. I think the fact that Jaylen Warren is a restricted free agent, I think they're going to re-sign him. I expect him to see some sneaky value. At tight end, I'm going to go Juwan Johnson. Look, I love the guy. I love the player, that kind of ex-wide receiver, that movable piece. I think someone's going to give him a contract, and I think they're actually going to use him, and we're going to see him potentially in a decent offense. So I'm very intrigued at kind of late round dart throws on Juwan Johnson. And then the kind of other player, I guess, is Chris Godwin. I think he's, to me, the best wide receiver on the market. And the reason I say that is because I don't think T. Higgins is going to hit the open market. I think there's going to be a bit of a bidding war for him. I think he's going to be able to pick his spot. And I think that Chris Godwin is going to be fantastic for fantasy next year. So I'm very excited about seeing him, where he ends up, where he chooses to pick, whether he chases the money or whether he does go and pair himself with, a great spot. Could he end up in Washington with Jaden Daniels? Could he end up in LA with Justin Herbert? I think there's some very interesting guys. Those are my one at every position. Rory's saying he sees, everyone hated Monty at Chicago. He sees similarities with Najee Harris. And I think that's it, isn't it? Is that if you stick Najee Harris, he was drafted to basically answer the running woes of the Steelers. And then they realized, actually, we need to invest in the offensive line. If he ends up somewhere where they've got a good offensive line, he could be competent, should we say. Yeah. Gary, before we move on to Gary's question, though, remember, we're going to be finishing up shortly. So if you've got any more questions, now's your last chance. Get them in the comments below. And if you're watching this on repeat, you can still get your comments in. Tom and I will answer 100% of questions all the way through the entire off season. And whilst you're there, hit the subscribe button, because we are just about on the precipice of rookie season. Garrett is saying, like Kylan Granson's as a talent, look forward to see where he goes. Might be worth picking up waivers just to wait and see. It's another athletic, big-bodied Colts tight end that we're hopeful for. I'm not convinced myself. I'm not sure I'll be adding him. There's other guys that I'd rather take a flyer on. Are you a Kylan Granson fan?
I was really hoping, because I haven't prepped my Kylan Granson takes in advance. I didn't come on here to talk about Kylan Granson. I didn't even realize he was a free agent. I mean, look, we do see some of these, especially at tight end, players take a long time to break out, although that's kind of a fallacy these days, but it can still happen. And someone with athletic gifts, if you have the roster spot and he's going to be available for free, there's going to be so much ability to have roster churn this summer. So I'm confident that he can be someone that you can pick up and drop 8 times across the course of the next 4 months.
If you want someone that I've been holding a torch for, that I still believe, Hunter Long, he was an absolute model darling. My rookie model loved him. He did nothing with the Dolphins. He's done nothing with the Rams, but maybe he just needs a new home. But yeah, before we move on though, that's all the questions we got in the chat. So I've got 2 questions for you, Lewis. If nobody gets any questions in before the end of that, we'll wrap it up. But Lewis, you've kind of dove into rookies already. I'm sort of, I'd say 50% of the way through my kind of process. Who's one rookie that you are in love with at the moment that's popping off for you that you think you're going to be higher than consensus on?
Yeah, the main guy that I have fallen for that is a higher than consensus thing, because I do like the top end of the class. There's not been anyone that I've watched and been hugely disappointed by, or not been able to recognize a lot of the existing concerns. Ty Felton out of Maryland is a very exciting wide receiver to me, and is someone that is currently being projected, I believe, early day 3, not really being spoken about. He did have some exciting reps at the Senior Bowl, so there was a little bit of hype for him on Twitter. But when I watched his tape, the route running and fluidity, I debated mentioning Tarek's name directly, but decided not to for those that aren't YouTube members. The route running and the fluidity is something that I really enjoyed, but also a decent amount of burst off the line and quite an intelligent release package. Now, he is relatively skinny. I think he's 6'1", 176. So he is, someone that does struggle a little bit coming off the line, and he also hasn't really run a full route tree throughout college just because of the Maryland offense. But definitely, like, the things that I look for, and I spoke about this in the video that I made about him, I like route running, I like positional versatility, and then I'm more interested in initial burst and explosivity than I am long speed. I would much rather get a player that I think can run routes, that has the IQ to be able to use slightly more advanced techniques, and then be able to line up all over the field and work all 3 levels of the field as well. Because I just think it gives so much more variety when you get into the NFL. If you can do a variety of different things, I think it makes you a more attractive prospect. And so last year, this was the reason why I really like Jalen McMillan. And yeah, Ty Felton's going to be someone that, current consensus, I think he goes at the beginning of the 4th in rookie drafts. And if that is going to be the case, I am going to pick him up in genuinely every single league, aside from the ones where people are watching this, or people follow me on Twitter, or people are in the Discord with me and know that I love him and pick him up one spot ahead of me. But yeah, he is someone that I'm really high on.
Nice. And then one last question. If you've got one dart throw, Lewis, it can be on any player in the league. They reach their 100th percentile outcome in 2025. Who would it be and why?
Interesting. I can't not go on brand here.
I can jump in and just say I've not prepped Lewis for this, so I've completely thrown him under the bus by asking him a tough question on the spot and expecting him to come up with some sort of nuanced answer. But I know Lewis knows his stuff, so yeah, there you go. I bought you another 30 seconds to think about your answer list.
Thank you. No, it's fine. I'm always thinking about Puka Nacua, so it's reasonably easy for me to make that answer anyway, just off the cuff. I do genuinely like. I think the end to the season, once he was healthy, made people come back in on Puka Nacua when he, thank you, Rory, when he obviously had struggled at the beginning of the season, and we see that kind of a lot of volatility with rookies going into sophomore seasons when, we get that initial jump and we go, Malik Neighbors might be Dynasty wide receiver 1, and then you go, okay, maybe let that settle a little bit. Puka going into next season, now the Rams need something else at wide receiver. They probably need something else at tight end. But if Matthew Stafford is staying in town, which at this point we genuinely don't know, every day it seems to get more towards the fact that he's not and that the Rams can look to trade him. If Matthew Stafford stays in town, Cooper Kupp is cut or traded. If Jordan Whittington goes into the season as the wide receiver 2, if we don't make a huge splash in free agency, or if we don't make, a splash on day 1 of the draft, or maybe second round, although we don't have a second rounder. So if we don't make a splash on day 1, Puka Nacua could genuinely set like a target record in the NFL next season. Now, I think a lot of people are going to come around to that across the course of the next few months if the Rams don't make a move. But he was already on pace for a ridiculous amount of targets towards the end of the season. The question is going to be whether his body can hold up with that, with quite physical play style. But genuinely, like, there's a real path to Puka Nacua wide receiver 1 in 2025.
Yeah, I love the player. I just don't know if he's a well-constituted enough human being that, let's say, looks after himself enough to be able to reach that 100th percentile outcome. I think he's going to be like a James Conner, who we're going to look back at his career in 7 years' time and be like, oh, he never played 17 games.
Yeah.
That's kind of how I'm seeing it. I like Rory's shout. Rory saying Anthony Richardson. Yeah, if we could wave the magic wand, give him his 100th percentile outcome, that would be very, very interesting. On the same line, mine would be Justin Fields. Like, I'm really interested in Justin Fields for fantasy this year. I think he's criminally undervalued right now. I think, given the dearth of options at quarterback, I think we know that some teams are going to miss out. And if you miss out, if you're let's take the Jets, for example, just because I like wallowing in my misery some more. Look, I sure as hell hope they're not going to trade up and get someone in the draft. They're probably going to miss out on the top 2 guys. I don't think they're going to spend big on Sam Darnold in free agency, given the history there. Like, yeah, I would much rather go and take a $5 million flyer on Justin Fields and say, come in, be our starter, we'll give you the season. Yeah, it might not work, but we'll then know, if it doesn't work, we get a high draft pick. If it does work, great, we've got found money. So yeah, in fantasy right now, I love going and sprinkle a little on Justin Fields. I think he's undervalued. I think there's a ceiling outcome in him that not many players have. We've seen it in fantasy. So yeah, I'm very intrigued and very hopeful about what he could be. And that is it. We've got no more questions in the chat, so I'm going to wrap it up. Lewis, Rory then fires a question in the chat asking what I'd buy Justin Fields for. In his 16-team Superflex, I'd pay a mid-first for him. I don't think you need to pay a mid-first. Given it's 16-team, obviously, the values kind of go a bit wild because I think quarterbacks are like gold dust in that sort of league. In a normal league, I'd probably pay a late first. Again, don't think you need to pay that, but that's what I'd be comfortable paying. Where are you at on kind of cost valuation for Justin Fields?
Yeah, first of all, I can tell you for a fact, Rory owns Justin Fields in a 16-team Superflex league that we are both in, and I promise you,
I'm about to get a trade offer is what I'm saying.
We're both going to get the trade offer straight after this show. In 16-team, like, taking flyers on quarterback is an incredible way to go, just because you never know what you're going to end up with, and obviously there aren't enough quarterbacks for all of you to have 3. So I would be willing to pay a late first. In 12-team, like, I don't think you need to offer anything more than a mid-second. I mean, if he was in this class, even with all the information that we know, he's probably still quarterback 3, just because of the physical tools. Maybe 4, depending on your thoughts on Dart, but like, I would happily take him midway through the second. If you were drafting somewhere where for some reason Justin Fields was available, I would take him at midway through the second round just for the upside. So I'd be more than happy paying that in a 12-team Superflex.
Yeah, I think he's a decent dart throw that you're probably not having to spend much money on right now.
Yeah,
but that is it. Thank you ever so much for jumping on, Lewis. Really appreciate you rolling with the punches and humouring me with some of my questions. Remind everyone that is watching, that's made it this far, where can they find you and where can they find your work?
Yep, absolutely. You can find me on Twitter at ff_pancake. I'm on Blue Sky as well, although I don't post so much there. But you can find all of my videos on YouTube at Fancy Pancake. I believe if you want a little bit of a spoiler, tomorrow's video is on Elika Yomanor, which was a very interesting prospect to watch. Yeah, doing 50 rookie profiles in 50 days, midway through at the minute. So if you want to get to know some of the rookies, head on over to Fancy Pancake and have a little bit of a watch.
And for those of you following along, Rory has already offered me Justin Fields for a 2027 first, which is going to get rejected. Sorry, Rory, I'm keeping that 2027 first. If you haven't hit the subscribe button, go ahead and do it now. We have got plenty of content coming your way over the next few days. And of course, rookie season is just around the corner. And you know that Tom and Tyler are very excited because best ball season is here. Stick around in the sanctuary and we will look after you. Have a good one.